What happened on CNN last night left Tucker Carlson completely speechless and might just end his career forever. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett walked onto that debate stage with evidence that nobody knew existed: racist text messages that Tucker thought were buried forever. What she revealed in the next 30 seconds didn't just shock the audience, it sent Tucker into a complete meltdown that's now breaking the internet. The moment Jasmine pulled out her phone and started reading those texts word for word, Tucker's face went from confident to pure panic. You could see him desperately trying to cut her off, but it was too late. The truth was out, and millions of viewers watched as one of the most powerful voices in conservative media got absolutely destroyed by a fearless black congresswoman who came prepared for war. Before we dive into this explosive confrontation that everyone's talking about, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss these incredible political moments. Trust me, you're going to want to see every second of how Jasmine Crockett just changed the game forever. To understand why this confrontation was so devastating, you need to know exactly who these two powerhouses are and why this battle was inevitable. Tucker Carlson, the man who built an empire on Fox News before his dramatic firing, the voice that shaped conservative thinking for millions of Americans. At 54 years old, he's worth over $30 million, lives in a massive estate in Maine, and has spent decades positioning himself as an offender of real Americans against the liberal elite. His show was the most watched program in cable news for years, drawing over 3 million viewers nightly who hung on his every word. But behind that carefully crafted image of the everyman populist, there's been whispers for years about his true beliefs, about private conversations that would shock even his most loyal fans. Tucker grew up in privilege. His father was a journalist and ambassador. His stepmother was an AYS to the Swanson frozen food fortune. He attended elite boarding schools and lived a life of luxury while building a career claiming to represent working-class Americans. This contradiction had always bothered his critics, but few have been able to effectively challenge his carefully constructed persona. His media empire extended beyond just television. Tucker had built a multimedia brand, including podcasts, books, speaking engagements, and a loyal social media following of millions. He was more than just a TV host. He was a movement leader, someone who could single-handedly drive news cycles and shape Republican talking points. His influence reached into the highest levels of government, with former President Trump regularly calling him for advice and current Republican leaders still seeking his endorsement. Then there's Jasmine Crockett, the 43-year-old congresswoman from Texas who's become the rising star of progressive politics, a former civil rights attorney who grew up in St. Louis. She's been making waves since day one with her fearless questioning during committee hearings and her refusal to back down from anyone, no matter how powerful they think they are. She's a type of politician who does her homework, who come prepared with receipts, and who's not intimidated by big names or bigger egos. But Jasmine's background runs much deeper than most people realize. She didn't grow up with political connections or family wealth. Her mother was a teacher. Her father worked in construction. She put herself through law school, working multiple jobs, and spent years as a public defender representing clients who couldn't afford private attorneys. She knows what it's like to fight powerful systems with limited resources, and that experience shaped her approach to politics. Her rise to Congress was meteoric but hard-earned. She defeated several well-funded opponents in her primary by building a grassroots coalition of young voters, minorities, and working-class families who felt abandoned by traditional politicians. Her campaign was run on a shoestring budget but maximized social media and community organizing to overcome her opponents' financial advantages. The stakes of this confrontation couldn't be higher. This wasn't just about two political figures going head-to-head on cable news. This was about the very soul of American political discourse. Could someone like Tucker, with all his wealth and influence and media connections, continue to spread divisive rhetoric while hiding his true beliefs? Or would someone like Jasmine, armed with the truth and the courage to speak it, finally holding accountable? For months, Tucker had been attacking Jasmine and other progressive congresswomen, calling them radical and dangerous and questioning their loyalty to America. He built entire segments around mocking their policies and their backgrounds, but Jasmine had been quietly building a case, gathering evidence, waiting for the perfect moment to strike back. That moment came last night on CNN's primetime debate special, and what happened next will go down in political history. The debate started normally enough. CNN's Anderson Cooper introduced both guests, explaining they were there to discuss the ongoing tensions in Congress over immigration policy. Tucker came out swinging immediately, doing what he does best, attacking progressive politicians with carefully crafted sound bites designed to go viral. Anderson: "What we're seeing from Congresswoman Crockett and her radical squad is nothing short an attack on American values." Tucker began, that familiar smirk spreading across his face. These people hate this country and everything it stands for. They want to tear down our borders, destroy our economy, and replace real Americans with people who don't share our values." The audience in CNN studio was split, some applause from conservative viewers, some uncomfortable shifting from others. Tucker was in his element, playing to the cameras, delivering the kind of inflammatory rhetoric that had made him famous. He adjusted his red tie with that characteristic confident gesture, the same one he'd used thousands of times on Fox News. Jasmine sat there listening, her expression calm but her eyes sharp. She'd heard this all before. She'd been the target of these attacks for months, but tonight was different. Tonight she was ready. Her navy blue blazer was perfectly pressed, her notes organized in front of her, and most importantly her phone was charged and ready. "Tucker, that's exactly the kind of language that's been dividing this country," she responded, her voice steady and controlled. "Instead of having real conversations about real solutions, you spend your time spreading fear and hatred about people who look like me." Tucker laughed, that condescending chuckle that his critics knew so well. He leaned back in his chair like he was settling in for an easy victory. "Oh, here we go, the race card. It's always about race with you people, isn't it? Can't defend your terrible policies, so you just call everyone racist." The temperature in the room was rising. Anderson Cooper tried to steer the conversation back to policy, but Tucker wasn't done. He was building up steam, getting more aggressive with each exchange. His voice was getting louder, his gestures more dramatic, like he was performing for an invisible Fox News audience. "You want to talk about divide in the country?" Tucker continued, pointing directly at Jasmine with his pen. "You're the one who called half of America white supremacist just for supporting border security. You're the one who said suburban families are agents of racism for caring about their communities. You made a career out of hating white people and calling it justice behind the cameras." CNN producers were getting excited. This was exactly the kind of heated exchange that would go viral. Social media managers were already preparing clip packages. The tension in the studio was becoming palpable. You could feel in the air like electricity before a storm. Now the audience was really stirring. Some people were standing up, others were shaking their heads. Conservative viewers in the audience were nodding along with Tucker's attacks, while progressive audience members looked increasingly uncomfortable. The division in the room perfectly reflected the division in America itself. Tucker was hitting his stride now, using all the rhetorical tricks that had made him famous. He was speaking directly to the camera, as if addressing his millions of former Fox News viewers. "Anderson, this is exactly what I've been warning about for years. These radical progressives don't want debate, they don't want discussion, they want to silence anyone who disagrees with their extreme agenda." But Jasmine was watching him carefully, studying his patterns, waiting for the right moment. She'd done her homework on Tucker Carlson. She knew his techniques, his weaknesses, his blind spots. Most importantly, she knew about his arrogance, his absolute confidence that he could demolish any opponent with his media training and quick wit. "Tucker," she said, her voice cutting through his monologue, "you keep talking about these people and you people. Why don't you just say what you really mean?" Tucker's eyes flashed with annoyance. He hated being interrupted, especially by someone he clearly viewed as beneath him. "I mean exactly what I said. Radical progressives who want to destroy America." "No," Jasmine pressed, leaning forward slightly. "You mean black people, you mean immigrants, you mean anyone who doesn't look like you or think like you. Why don't you have the courage to say what you really think?" The room was getting more tense by the second. Tucker's face was starting to wring and his famous smirk was becoming more forced. He clearly hadn't expected this level of pushback from someone he'd probably dismissed as just another progressive politician. "You want to talk about courage?" Tucker shot back, his voice rising. "Let's talk about the courage to admit that your policies have failed. Let's talk about the courage to acknowledge that your social justice agenda is destroying cities, destroying families, destroying everything that made America great." Jasmine leaned forward, her voice getting stronger. "Tucker, you want to talk about what I've said? Let's talk about what you've said, not just on camera where you try to sound reasonable, but in private. Let's talk about your real thoughts about people like me." That's when something shifted in Tucker's expression. For just a fraction of a second the confident mask slipped, his eyes darted slightly like someone who just heard a sound they weren't expecting. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I think you do," Jasmine said, reaching into her jacket pocket with deliberate slowness. The movement was calculated, theatrical. She wanted everyone in that room to see what was coming next. "I think you know exactly what I'm talking about." The camera zoomed in on her hand as she pulled out her phone. The device looked innocent enough, but Tucker's reaction was immediate and unmistakable. His eyes went wide, his breathing became shallow, and for the first time in the entire debate he looked genuinely worried. The arrogant smirk was completely gone, now replaced by something approaching fear. Anderson Cooper, veteran journalist, that he was immediately sensed a dramatic shift in the room's energy. "Congresswoman, what are you doing?" he asked, his voice carrying both curiosity and concern. "I'm about to show America who Tucker Carlson really is." Jasmine replied, her voice now carrying the full authority of someone who knew she held all cards. I'm about to read some text messages that Tucker sent to a friend of mine, messages where he shows his true feelings about Black Americans, about immigrants, about anyone who doesn't look like him. Tucker's face was turning red now, but not from anger, from panic. He started shaking his head frantically, his hands gesturing wildly. This is ridiculous, Anderson. You can't let her do this. This is a setup. These are probably fake. This is completely inappropriate for a news program. But Jasmine was already reading from her phone, her voice clear and strong as she delivered the first devastating blow. Text message from Tucker Carlson sent 3 months ago. These people are destroying everything we built. They're not Americans, they're invaders, and someone needs to stop them before they ruin this country completely. The studio erupted like a bomb had gone off. People were gasping, shouting, standing up. Some audience members looked shocked, others looked angry, still others looked vindicated, like they'd been waiting years for this moment. Tucker was waving his hands desperately, trying to interrupt, but Jasmine's voice cut through the chaos. Another text from Tucker: I can't stand these uppity congresswomen thinking they can lecture real Americans. Someone needs to put them in their place. Tucker was now visibly panicking, sweat beginning to form on his forehead. Stop, Anderson, make her stop. These are private conversations taken out of context. This is a violation of my privacy. But the damage was already being done in the control room. Producers were frantically managing the live broadcast, knowing they were witnessing television history. Social media was exploding in real time. The hashtag Tucker text was already trending on Twitter, climbing toward the #1 spot, and Jasmine Crockett was just getting started. What happened next was the most devastating political takedown in recent memory. Jasmine Crockett didn't just expose Tucker Carlson, she systematically destroyed his entire public persona with surgical precision. Tucker, you want to talk about context, Jasmine said, her voice now carrying the full weight of her authority as both a congresswoman and a former prosecutor. Let me give you some context. This next text was sent right after I questioned the Attorney General about voting rights. You want to hear what you really think about Black women in positions of power? Tucker was now desperately trying to interrupt, his usual media-trained composure completely shattered. Anderson, this is completely inappropriate. She's violating my privacy. These could be fake, they could be doctored. This is exactly what the radical left does when they can't win on the issues. His voice was getting higher, more desperate. Sweat was now clearly visible on his forehead under the studio lights. The confident media personality who had dominated cable news for years was transforming before millions of viewers into something much smaller and more pathetic. Text message from Tucker Carlson. Jasmine continued, her voice cutting through protests like a knife. That Crockett woman needs to learn her place. These people think they can just waltz into Congress and start making demands. Someone should remind her that this is still a white man's country. The studio fell completely silent except for the hum of the cameras. Even the camera operators stopped moving. The weight of those words hung in the air like a bomb that had just exploded. You could hear people in the audience gasping, some starting to boo, others sitting in stunned silence. Anderson Cooper looked stunned, his decades of journalism experience clearly not having prepared him for this moment. Tucker, do you want to respond to that? Tucker's face was now completely red. Sweat visible on his forehead, his hands were shaking as he pointed at Jasmine, his voice cracking with mixture of rage and desperation. This is a witch hunt. This is exactly what they do. They attack anyone who dares to speak the truth about what's happening to this country. But his protest sounded hollow now, desperate. The arrogant confidence that had made him famous was completely gone, replaced by the frantic denials of someone who's carefully constructed world was collapsing in real time. But Jasmine wasn't done. She had saved the worst for last. Oh, Tucker, we're not finished yet, she said, scrolling through her phone with the confidence of someone who knew she held absolute power in this moment. Because the American people need to hear what you said about the families who died in that mass shooting in Buffalo, the shooting that was inspired by the replacement theory that you've been pushing on your show for years. Tucker's eyes went wide with genuine fear. Don't you dare. Text message from Tucker Carlson sent 2 days after the Buffalo shooting. Jasmine read, her voice now filled with righteous anger. At least someone had the courage to do something about the invasion. Too bad he couldn't have been more strategic about it. The studio exploded into chaos. People were standing up, shouting, some trying to leave. Tucker was on his feet now, pointing at Jasmine, his voice cracking with rage and desperation. That's enough. That's a complete fabrication, Anderson. She's making this up. This is character assassination. But everyone could see the truth written all over his face, the way his hands were shaking, the way his voice was breaking, the way he couldn't look directly at the camera anymore. Furthermore, this wasn't a behavior of an innocent man being falsely accused. This was a behavior of someone whose deepest, darkest secrets had just been exposed of the world. Jasmine stood up slowly, her phone still in her hand, her voice now carrying the full moral authority of someone who had just delivered justice. Tucker, for years you've hidden behind your television show, spreading hatred and division while pretending to be some kind of patriot. You've attacked people like me, question our loyalty, call us dangerous, all while harboring beliefs that would make a Klan member proud. Tucker was now backing away from the table, his voice barely above a whisper. This isn't over, this isn't how this ends. Oh, but it is, Jasmine replied, her voice steady and final, because the American people have just seen who you really are and they're never going to forget it. The camera caught Tucker's face in that moment, the moment when he realized his career, his reputation, everything he had built was crashing down around him. The confident smirk was gone, replaced by the look of man who knew he'd been completely and utterly defeated. Anderson Cooper tried to restore order, but it was impossible. The damage was done. Tucker Carlson had been exposed and Jasmine Crockett had delivered one of the most decisive political victories in modern history. As Tucker stormed off the set, pushing past camera operators and producers, Jasmine remained seated, calm and composed, watching him leave with the satisfaction of someone who had just delivered long overdue justice. The aftermath of Jasmine Crockett's exposure of Tucker Carlson didn't just stay in that CNN studio. It created a political earthquake that's still shaken the foundations of American media and politics. Within minutes of the confrontation ending, social media erupted like a volcano. Hashtag Tucker text was trending worldwide within 15 minutes. Hashtag Jasmine Justice followed shortly after. The video clips of Tucker's meltdown were being shared faster than Twitter servers could handle. Conservative Twitter was in complete meltdown mode. Some of Tucker's most loyal supporters were trying to claim the texts were fake, that it was all set up by the liberal media, but their hearts weren't really in it. Everyone had seen Tucker's reaction, everyone had watched his face when those texts were read. You can't fake that kind of panic, that kind of genuine terror at being exposed. One prominent conservative account with over 2 million followers posted, even if these texts are real, Tucker was just speaking the truth that most Americans are thinking. But even that defense was getting ratio by replies pointing out that admitting the texts were real while defending their content was somehow even worse. Meanwhile, progressive Twitter was having a celebration. The hashtag thank you Jasmine was trending alongside the others. Video clips of her reading the text were being edited into highlight reels with dramatic music and slow motion effects on Tucker's facial expressions. One video showing the exact moment his face changed when she mentioned the Buffalo shooting had already been viewed over 5 million times. The mainstream media response was swift and decisive. CNN issued a statement within an hour: while we believe in giving all viewpoint a platform, we cannot and will not tolerate the kind of hateful rhetoric that was exposed tonight. Tucker Carlson will not be invited back to any CNN programs. But CNN was just the beginning. Within hours, major advertisers who had previously worked with Tucker's various projects were distancing themselves. 3 book publishers announced they were canceling upcoming projects with him. 2 podcast networks dropped his shows immediately. The response from Congress was equally dramatic. By morning, over 150 Democratic members of Congress had issued statements condemning Tucker's exposed texts, but more importantly, several Republican members also spoke out. Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska called the texts completely unacceptable and inconsistent with American values. Even some of Tucker's former Fox News colleagues were quietly distancing themselves. But the real story was happening with Jasmine Crockett herself. Overnight, she had transformed from a rising progressive star into a national hero for millions of Americans who had been waiting years for someone to finally hold Tucker accountable. Her Twitter followers jumped from 800,000 to over 3 million in 24 hours. Her official congressional website crashed from too much traffic. Fundraising emails from her campaign were pulling in record donations, over $2 million in the first day alone. More importantly, Jasmine had proven something that many people thought was impossible in today's political climate: that truth and courage could still triumph over hatred and division. She had shown that someone could stand up to a powerful media figure and win, not through shouting or personal attacks, but through careful preparation and fearless truth-telling. The legal implications were also starting to unfold. Civil rights organizations announced they were reviewing Tucker's texts for potential hate speech violations. The families of Buffalo shooting victims indicated through their lawyers that they were considering legal action based on his comments about the tragedy. Tucker himself seemed to disappear from public view completely. His social media accounts went silent. His representatives stopped returning calls from reporters. Some sources suggested he had retreated to his Maine estate and was considering leaving the country entirely. But perhaps the most significant aftermath was what Jasmine's victory meant for the broader political landscape. For years, progressive politicians have been playing defense against right-wing media attacks, constantly having to respond to inflammatory rhetoric and false accusations. Jasmine had flipped the script entirely. She had shown that with proper preparation and the courage to fight back, the Attackers could become the attacked. Young progressive politicians across the country were taking notes. If a congresswoman from Texas could take down one of the most powerful voices in conservative media, what else was possible? What other supposed untouchables could be held accountable? The conservative media ecosystem was also reeling. Tucker had been one of their most important voices, one of their most effective attack dogs. If he could be brought down this easily, this completely, who was safe? The message was clear. The days of consequence-free inflammatory rhetoric might finally be coming to an end. Other conservative media personalities were scrambling to distance themselves from Tucker while also trying to defend the broader movement. Sean Hannity posted a carefully worded statement calling Tucker's exposed text disappointing, but stopped short of condemning them entirely. Laura Ingraham went completely silent on social media for the first time in years. Ben Shapiro released a video trying to separate Tucker's personal views from his professional commentary, but even his usually loyal audience wasn't buying it. The ripple effects were spreading throughout. Right-wing media advertisers weren't just pulling out of Tucker-related projects, they were reviewing their relationships with other controversial hosts. Several major companies announced they were reassessing their advertising strategies for political programming entirely. Meanwhile, progressive media was having a field day. MSNBC devoted an entire hour to analyzing the texts and their implications. The View spent 2 segments discussing what they called Jasmine's moment. Late-night comedy shows were already writing sketches about Tucker's meltdown, with Saturday Night Live announcing they would do a special cold open about the confrontation. Fox News, Tucker's former home, was notably silent about the entire controversy. Sources inside the network suggested that many executives were privately relieved that Tucker was no longer their problem, but they were also worried about what other explosive evidence might be out there about their other hosts. Several Fox personalities were reportedly going to their own phones and private communications, terrified that they might be next. The network's official statement was carefully neutral. Mr. Carlson has not been associated with Fox News for some time. We do not comment on the private communications of former employees, but behind the scenes there was reportedly panic about potential legal liability and advertiser exodus. Conservative think tanks and organizations that had previously worked with Tucker were also facing difficult decisions. The Heritage Foundation quietly removed Tucker's past speeches from their website. The American Conservative Union announced they were reviewing Tucker's role in upcoming events. Several book publishers who had worked with Tucker in the past issued statements distancing themselves from his views. As the week progressed, more details emerged about how Jasmine had obtained the texts. It turned out that a former friend of Tucker's, disgusted by his private comments, had been quietly documenting his most inflammatory statements for months. When Tucker began his public attacks on Jasmine specifically, this friend reached out to her office with the evidence. The friend, who remained anonymous for safety reasons but was later revealed to be a former Fox News producer who had worked closely with Tucker, told reporters, "I couldn't stay silent anymore. Tucker says one thing on TV and something completely different in private. The American people deserve to know who he really is." This revelation added another layer to the story. It wasn't just about Tucker's racist texts, it was about a pattern of behavior that had troubled even his closest associates. The former producer revealed that Tucker's private comments had become increasingly extreme over the past few years, especially after he left Fox News. He felt like he could say anything in private because he thought his inner circle was completely loyal, the source explained. But there's a difference between political disagreement and outright hatred. When he started celebrating violence and talking about putting people in their place based on their race, I knew I had to act. The producer also revealed that there were even more damaging texts and recordings that hadn't been made public yet. What Congresswoman Crockett shared was just the tip of the iceberg. Tucker has been saying things in private that would shock even his most hardcore supporters. This revelation sent another wave of panic through conservative media circles. If there was more evidence out there, who else might be implicated? Several prominent conservative figures were reportedly reaching out to former associates, tried to gauge whether they might have similar exposure. Jasmine used this revelation to make an even broader point about accountability in media and politics. In a powerful speech on the House floor, she said, "This isn't just about one man's hateful texts. This is about a system that allows people to profit from division while hiding their true beliefs. This is about the courage it takes to stand up and say enough." She continued, "For too long we've allowed people like Tucker Carlson to spread hatred on television while claiming they're just entertainers or commentators, but these texts show us the truth. They believe every word of the poison they're spreading. They're not just playing characters for ratings, they're revealing their real beliefs, and those beliefs are dangerous to our democracy." The speech was viewed over 10 million times on YouTube. Within 48 hours it was being shared across social media platforms, translated into multiple languages, and cited by international news outlets as an example of American political courage. The international response was also significant. Media outlets around the world covered the story as an example of American political accountability in action. The BBC called it a watershed moment in American political discourse. German newspapers praised Jasmine's courage in confronting one of America's most divisive media figures, but perhaps the most meaningful response came from ordinary Americans. Letters poured into Jasmine's office from people across the country: teachers, veterans, small business owners, retirees, thanking her for having the courage to stand up to hatred and division. One letter from a black veteran in Ohio read, "Congresswoman Crockett, I served this country for 20 years and I've watched people like Tucker question my patriotism and my worth as American. Thank you for showing him and everyone like him that we won't be silent anymore. Thank you for fighting back." Another letter came from a white suburban mother in Arizona. "I used to watch Tucker sometimes because my husband liked him, but I always felt uncomfortable with some things he said. After seeing those texts I realized my instincts were right. Thank you for having the courage to expose the truth." A retired teacher from Florida wrote, "I've been teaching for 35 years and I've seen how hateful rhetoric affects children. Thank you for standing up to bullies and showing young people that truth and courage can still win." The letters kept coming, hundreds of them each day. Immigration lawyers thanking her for defending their clients' humanity, Jewish community leaders praising her for exposing anti-Semitic dog whistles, Muslim Americans grateful that someone was finally holding accountable the voices that had demonized their communities. But it wasn't just individual letters. Entire organizations were reaching out to express their support. The NAACP issued a statement calling Jasmine's confrontation with Tucker a watershed moment in the fight against media-enabled racism. The Anti-Defamation League praised her for exposing the dangerous rhetoric that fuels extremism and violence. Labor unions, civil rights groups, immigrant advocacy organizations, and progressive religious leaders all issued statements supporting Jasmine's actions. Even some traditionally non-political organizations felt compelled to speak out. The American Library Association noted that Tucker's text contained the same kind of dehumanizing language that had historically been used to justify book banning and censorship. The support wasn't just symbolic, it was translating into real political power. Jasmine's fundraising numbers were breaking records, but more importantly, volunteer sign-up for her future campaigns were through the roof. Young people who had never been involved in politics were reaching out to work on her team. Law students were applying for internships in her office. The confrontation had inspired a new generation of political activists who saw Jasmine as proof that fighting back against hatred could actually work. The story also highlighted the power of preparation and strategic thinking in political combat. Jasmine hadn't just gotten lucky or caught Tucker off guard. She had methodically built her case, verified her evidence, and chosen the perfect moment to strike. It was a masterclass in political warfare that other progressive politicians were studying and learning from. Political science professors at universities across the country were already incorporating the confrontation into their curricula. Harvard's Kennedy School announced they would be hosting a special seminar on strategic political communication lessons from the Crockett-Carlson confrontation. Georgetown's Public Policy Institute scheduled a panel discussion featuring former congressional staffers analyzing Jasmine's tactical approach. The confrontation was also being studied internationally. The London School of Economics invited Jasmine to speak about her experience as part of their series on democratic accountability. Universities in Germany, Canada, and Australia were examining the incident as a case study in how to effectively challenge authoritarian rhetoric. Campaign strategists from both parties were dissecting every aspect of Jasmine's approach. Democratic consultants were studying how she had gathered intelligence, verified sources, and chosen the optimal timing for maximum impact. Even some Republican strategists speaking anonymously admitted they were impressed by her tactical execution. Whatever you think about her politics, you have to respect the preparation and strategy, one GOP consultant told Politico. She didn't just wing this, she had a plan, she executed it flawlessly, and she achieved her objective completely. That's professional-level political combat. Young political operatives were particularly fascinated by how Jasmine had weaponized social media and modern communication tools. She hadn't just destroyed Tucker in a moment, she had created content that would continue damaging his reputation for years to come. The video clips were perfectly sized for social media sharing, the quotes were devastatingly quotable, and the timing ensured maximum coverage across all news cycles. As we look toward the future, the Tucker Carlson-Jasmine Crockett confrontation will likely be remembered as a turning point, the moment when the tide began to turn against divisive rhetoric and toward real accountability. It showed that with courage, preparation, and a commitment to truth, even the most powerful voices of hatred and division can be brought down. Tucker Carlson came into that CNN studio thinking he was going to have another easy night of attacking progressive politicians. Instead, he walked into a trap that destroyed his career and reputation in a matter of minutes, and Jasmine Crockett proved that sometimes justice really can prevail. The question now is who's next, because after watching Jasmine take down Tucker Carlson with such devastating effectiveness, you can bet that other accountability-minded politicians are building their own cases against other divisive media figures. The era of consequence-free hatred might finally be coming to an end. If you enjoyed watching this incredible political takedown, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. We'll be following all the aftermath from this historic confrontation, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next, because if Jasmine Crockett could take down Tucker Carlson, this completely imagine what other surprises she might have in store for his allies and imitators. The political landscape just changed forever, and we're here to document every moment of this historic shift toward real accountability in American politics.